I'm E. Scott England, and Anchored in Education is the podcast dedicated to all things education. Educators across the world routinely engage in conversations surrounding fundamentals, concepts, and new ideas that improve this great profession. Sometimes we agree, other times we disagree, but at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education. A few months ago, I had a couple of back and forth emails with Adam Grant. I asked him who he would recommend as a guest on Anchored in Education. In no time, he sent back an email with a half dozen names. It was up to me to research each name and determine how they fit in the Anchored in Education platform. One of those names was Melinda Wenner Moyer. I put the name into a search and discovered that she was a journalist with a particular interest in parenting, science, and medicine. The next line I read said she was the author of the book How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes: Science-Based Strategies for Better Parenting from Tots to Teens. My search stopped immediately and instead shifted to how can I purchase this book now? A couple of days later, I was so engrossed in Melinda's book and realized I had to get her onto the podcast. I reached out to her and Melinda readily agreed, but her first thought was she wasn't a teacher. But in reading the book, I could already see how this book would benefit educators, parents, soon-to-be parents, or in short, everyone. I finished reading the book towards the end of 2022, and it has yet to make it to my bookshelf because I keep reopening it to reread certain sections. Today, she joins us to talk more about the book and the implications of how her book can help educators and parents alike find research-proven strategies to better assist children. Melinda, welcome to Anchored in Education today.
Hi, Scott. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited that you are able to join us to have this conversation, and we're going to talk about why I believe this book, why I believe you are the perfect guest to talk to listeners on Anchored in Education today, and we'll get to that. And I'm already getting ahead of myself, but that's what I do when I'm excited. And so I always begin each episode asking guests, how did you become anchored in education? And so I know that you don't have a background in education, but you have extensive experience reading and interpreting research, and then you present it in a fashion that helps all of us, both in and outside of the profession. So I'm hoping before we get started, you can give us a little insight into your professional background.
Absolutely. So I studied molecular biology actually in college and music, which was a strange combination.
Yeah, well, that is interesting. That's a whole nother podcast episode.
Right. Right. It's weird. There are a lot of science journalists who also have backgrounds in music, so it's very interesting.
Okay.
But I didn't really do much with the music. I mean, I still enjoy it, but I loved science, but I quickly realized I did not want to be a scientist.
Okay.
And so I, started trying to think, well, what else? What do I like doing? What can I do? And I eventually, it dawned on me, I've loved to write since I was a kid. And I thought, my gosh, maybe I could write about science. That would be really fun. And so I went to NYU and got a master's specifically in science, health, and environmental journalism.
Okay.
It's a really small program. And then, so this was in 2006 that I graduated, and I at first was writing mostly about genetics and molecular biology and all these really gnarly topics, which was really fun.
Sure.
And then I did some, hard, but fun.
Right.
And then I started writing more about medicine and health, and eventually, I had kids.
Yeah.
And I realized I had so many parenting questions that I didn't know how to answer. And I started looking to see, is there science to answer some of these questions? What does the research in child development look like and in education? And I realized there's just so much amazing research that really hadn't been translated for a lay audience. And so, this was like 10 years ago, I really started focusing more on writing about child development, about, raising kids, and I love it. My kids now are almost 12. My son is almost 12 and my daughter's 8. And I'm still learning things every day. I'm still messing things up. I'm still learning.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So it's really, really fun.
Isn't it interesting how, I mean, I've heard so many times, and it's part of my story too, how you have such well laid plans and then you have kids, and it seems like everything sort of changes. And that's not a bad thing. I mean, clearly it has been a positive for you, but it's always interesting how, we can have part of what we do defined by our children to help ourselves and to help our kids. And it sounds like maybe that's what this adventure took you down.
Yes, that's true. I feel really fortunate that I mean, my job, I basically get paid to answer my own questions,
Yeah, right.
which is really nice, and just being able to interview some of the, preeminent experts on child development and it's I mean, I feel, yeah, very fortunate because I am learning so much every day and I'm able to benefit from it directly. And, it benefits my kids, my family as well. So it's been really amazing.
Yeah. All right. So, how to raise kids who aren't assholes. Science-based strategies for better parenting from tots to teens. When this book was recommended to me, I didn't even do a double take at the title. I just said, yes, I need this book. And I mean, ordered it right then. Then I read that your husband had a similar reaction when you proposed the book project. Can you give us more insight into where the desire, need for this book came from?
So this was back in 2018. And I just started feeling like, wow, there's a lot of bad behavior all around me. So the Me Too movement was opening up and we were learning about, Harvey Weinstein and others who were doing unspeakable things.
Yeah.
Some people in the political arena were maybe publicly modeling some questionable behavior at times.
Still going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very much. And, I was observing this and I started thinking about, well, what are my kids learning from this? Because I knew that, to some degree they were exposed to this. They were hearing about what was going on. And I also knew there's a theory in psychology called social learning theory that suggests that kids really learn what is appropriate behavior based on what adults around them, and especially adults in positions of power, are doing. And so, I really thought, gosh, are they learning that bad behavior is okay? And I started worrying about it a lot. And around that time, I realized, gosh, what I want more than anything else is to raise kids who grow up to be good human beings. I just want my kids to be kind, generous people. And I also knew that, if a lot of us raise good kids, maybe we could kind of change the world for the better. And, it felt like, wow, there's some potential here. And so, the actual title came to me one night. I was out with my husband for an anniversary dinner. And I was sitting there with him and I don't remember, I think we'd had a conversation about something and it had stalled. And then I said, out of the blue, I just said, you know what? I should write a book called How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes. And it just came out of my head like that.
Yeah.
And my husband looked at me and he said, oh my gosh, that's it. That's your book. Because I'd wanted to write a book for a while, but I could never settle on the right idea. And he said, I think that's your book. And I said, I think it is too. And then the next day I started working on a proposal.
Yeah. So the title came to you before you even really started on the book then?
It absolutely did. Yeah. And, as I sat with the title, I started, and I had already kind of started doing this, but I continued to look into, was there research on how to raise good human beings? Was there research that would be informative, that wasn't obvious in some way that, we didn't already know? And I found there was so much research and some of it was really counterintuitive, really contradicted what I was doing with my own kids. And so then I realized, wow, there's really the potential here to educate parents on things they might not know. I mean, as I said, I was learning too from the research. Yeah. And I was talking to other parents and they were saying, we feel the same way, that we just want our kids to be good people, but we don't always know how to do it. And so it felt like this would be a really important book potentially.
And I definitely think that, that a lot of us, that's what we want out of our kids. Like, I don't think we ever want to, start and be like, yeah, I really hope my kid's an asshole someday. But in reading the book, and we'll get more into it, but there was so many things where you don't realize just how impressionable some of the things that we do are on kids. Whereas the other thing that got me was, There were a lot of things that I've always tried to avoid because I thought, oh, this will definitely shape my child in a bad way. And then I read the research and I find that that's not really it. And so it's interesting. We'll get into that. Now, when we talk about the title, you said it just kind of popped in your head, and then the next day you started putting together a proposal. Was there ever a time in which you wavered on the title and you're like, oh, maybe that sounded good when I was on an anniversary dinner, but now...
Yeah, definitely. The title felt right to me, but what I worried about was, once the book was out in the world, would the title turn potential readers off?
Sure.
Would it not be covered in newspapers? And, was there going to be an issue in terms of marketing it? That was a big question that my publisher definitely had for a while. And we had a lot of back and forths. And I remember really trying to brainstorm alternative words for asshole that weren't as offensive. And nothing really worked. It was like, well, jerks, that's not it just didn't click. And I think there's something about that word asshole that I think parents right now, it's sort of a lot of us kind of refer to our kids as assholes sometimes, as a joke, of course.
Oh, sure.
But it just felt like it was sort of in the public conversation as a word that was kind of both going to hint at the fact that the book would be funny in parts, but was also, I hope that the subtitle kind of indicated it was going to be science-based. But
right.
Yeah, there was definitely concern that it might backfire.
Sure.
But in the end, my publisher said, you know what, let's do it. Let's see what happens. And I think it kind of in the end went both ways. I do think, it wasn't covered on like morning shows or,
right.
there were outlets that did not want to use the title of my book, but at the same time, I think the title is so memorable that helped it, the fact that it had the swear word in it. So who knows, I didn't get to do a randomized control study here to see which title would end up doing better, but I'm happy with it. I'm glad that I chose that title now.
Yeah, well, I'm glad too. It's been a great conversation starter for me, just having it in my possession. Now, the book is laid out into 11 chapters in which you present the topic at the beginning of each chapter and then proceed to give strategies when working with your own children. You're also quite honest in letting the reader know that your own motherhood journey that you've made some of the very mistakes researchers caution about. But then you turn around and you've applied some of the strategies that you've learned during writing the book with your own children. So what do you believe was the biggest revelation in writing this book, and what has been the most impactful for parenting?
It's a really great question. I think the biggest thing, and this was one of the themes that I kept coming across, no matter what topic, what sort of area in developmental psychology I was looking at, but it was that we should lean into the conversations that we want to protect our kids from, and lean into the topics we want to protect our kids from, and so as a parent, I don't want to scare my kids, and I don't want to cause them to worry about things. And so I used to think, gosh, maybe I shouldn't talk to them about some of the race-related violence that's ongoing in the world, or maybe I shouldn't talk to them about sex and, sexism and all of these sort of big, scary things. And, I thought, well, protecting them from it is going to be good for them. And what I discovered was really the opposite, which is, as counterintuitive as it is, the more that we can actually find, age-appropriate ways to talk to kids about these big, important topics, the better off they are. And I mean, there's a few reasons for that. One is by not talking about these issues, we are not actually protecting our kids from them.
Absolutely.
They're, hearing about things at school, through their friends, through the media, online. And all we're doing really when we don't talk to our kids about these things is we're just ensuring that the information they are getting is not coming from us.
Right.
So that's not great, right?
Well, yeah.
What they're hearing and how it's framed. Yeah. And then also, by, I think, broaching conversations regularly about these topics, we're communicating to our kids that they can come to us when they have questions about them, that we're saying these topics aren't taboo, they're a little scary, or they're a little overwhelming sometimes to think about, but you can come to us whenever you have questions or whenever you hear something you're not sure about. And I think that really is powerful as well.
Oh, sure. And that is one thing that, you said that just highlight, if we don't have these conversations, as difficult as they are and as uncomfortable as they can be sometimes, because, let's face it, talking about sex with our children, no matter how well informed we are, still has a little bit of that just like, feeling of uncomfort. But if we don't do it, then where are they getting the information from? And that's what frightens me the most, especially, when you opened today talking about there's some unfavorable characters out there in the media, and some are still, prevalent. Like, I don't want the information my kids are getting coming from some of these people. Like, so, as an educator and a parent, this book has served as an eye-opener in many areas, because we often let outdated and mythical rhetoric dominate our beliefs. So, for example, chapter 3, you point out that society says boys will be boys when they exhibit masculine emotions when they're upset. But when girls do it, we label them as dramatic or aggressive or even hysterical. Now, another example is chapter 5, in which signal directly or indirectly what children should like based upon their biological sex. I know right now these can be contentious topics. How do we go about, or what does the science tell us that we should be doing to help raise healthy, non-asshole children?
Yeah, the gender issues are tricky. And I think part of it is, we as adults have been socialized from birth to, think of girls as being a certain way and boys as being a certain way, and to kind of expect things of boys versus girls. We've just grown up in this world that's like this.
Yeah.
And so it's very easy to just do the same thing with our kids, and to, encourage our boys to play with trucks and to wear blue, and, encourage our girls to play with dolls and tell them that they look pretty, and, focus on how they look. But we know there's really a pretty significant body of research that suggests that these kinds of gender stereotypes are harmful in the long run to be teaching our kids. And it's hard because they're still going to be getting these messages from society. But I think when we as parents can gently push against them at home and, ask our kids questions sometimes to sort of make them think about things like, an example might be when somebody comments on my daughter's appearance at the grocery store, but doesn't say anything to my son, and says like, "Oh, you look so pretty. I love your dress," but don't say anything to him. I might say, "Gosh, why do you think that person commented on your looks, but not his? Like, what do you think that means?" And my daughter now is so sick of me having these conversations. She's like, "Yes, I know, Mom. It's because society tells us girls should look pretty and that boys don't have to look pretty, and et cetera." But, I think to the degree that we can be aware of these stereotypes and try to sort of not fall into the traps as parents, the better off our kids will be, because we know that boys who are sort of socialized to not ever feel, not ever show their feelings of fear or sadness, and who are sort of, just encouraged to play sports and do all these things and not allowed to sort of explore maybe their more feminine side, they have ramifications for school, for academics. We know that boys who are, raised with really strong gender stereotypes do worse in school. They're actually, when they get older, they're more likely to, behave in sexist ways towards girls. And the same goes for girls in terms of when we really encourage girls to look, a certain way, and then we don't maybe encourage them to pursue science and math as much. They really internalize that in worrying ways. By the age of 6 or 7, they start to think they're not as smart as boys. They shouldn't be doing hard things, that, they should gravitate towards certain kinds of jobs. And so I think it's really hard because, again, as I said, we have been socialized this way our whole lives. But to the degree that we can sort of, let our kids explore what they want to explore and not push them a certain way or not encourage them to do things that are really gendered, the better off I think they will be. And that's what the research suggests.
Absolutely. And to me, I think a lot of times that if society wouldn't kind of push in the direction of boys will be boys or, girls will be girls, that really, I don't think that our students really think that until it's put into their head to think that. And I go back to my time as an administrator, principal and superintendent, that I had teachers that would excuse playground behavior as, well, they're just being boys, or there would be some sort of disagreement between girls, and the teachers would, they would say, they're being girls. By lunch they'll be over it. And I knew that was not right then, but I didn't really know how to address that in a way that would take care of it. Is this something that you believe, teachers, now we have to kind of walk a fine line as far as what we're doing, because we, as far as with how parents are involved and everything else, but do you believe that teachers could use some of the strategies that you talk in here and at least approaching how they talk to their students differently?
Absolutely. I think one of the simplest things that teachers can do that maybe won't ruffle any feathers is to just not emphasize gender so much in the classroom. So we know that one of the reasons kids start to believe in gender stereotypes is just because we're constantly telling them that, we're constantly calling attention to the fact that, like, there's girls and there's boys, and we're emphasizing gender as an important thing. And from that, kids infer that, oh, well, if everybody's, constantly lining kids up by gender, or, talking to the girl, saying boys and girls, let's do this, constantly highlighting gender, then they say, well, gender must be important. And that must mean boys and girls are really different. And that kind of starts the process of, like, once they think, oh, boys and girls must be quite different, then they start really trying to figure out, well, what do boys do then? What's a boy thing versus a girl thing? And that sort of fuels everything. So I think a very simple thing is, and this, I guess, is probably most relevant for elementary and middle school teachers, but just, say, all right, students, instead of all right, boys and girls, and, don't line up or really call attention to gender, don't, as a gym teacher, don't have the boys playing against the girls. I mean, that we know is a recipe for fueling stereotypes and resentment between the genders. So really just trying to just downplay gender in general can make a really big difference.
Yeah, well, I can think back to my life as a student, even in junior high, and I have no idea, in trying to think back, how it was even related to the math curriculum, because it was a math class. But the teacher established boys and girls, like, debate team on which was the superior sex. And, and then you had, and you think back, of course, I was 7th or 8th grade. I didn't think of anything now, but looking back, like, wow, we do some things where we probably have good intentions, but the message is just completely missed, which I think is a lot what your book tries to highlight. So, Melinda, I want to jump to chapter 6. So anyone who has children, works with children, they would really benefit from learning how to raise or teach children to have a healthy self-esteem without being a narcissist. So, first of all, I thank you for the disclaimer that building up my children's self-esteem too high doesn't tip the bucket to narcissism. What we need to be cautious of, though, is overemphasizing achievements to the point that children display higher levels of anxiety or depression, trying to keep up with their perceived impressions of what makes us happy. So it seems like we kind of have a delicate balance that we have to try to achieve here. What can you offer listeners in promoting a healthy self-esteem?
Yeah, this is a really hard one, because I think, as parents and of course educators too, we want our kids to be doing well in school. We want them to achieve in all the ways that they can achieve, so that they can then, get into a good college and have a good life. And, all of these desires for kids and students are really understandable and well-meaning. But what the research is suggesting now, there's a growing body of research that has been done on especially kids who go to like high achieving schools. These kids really struggle. Their mental health is in many ways, worse than kids who we might expect would have really issues with mental health, like in inner cities. These kids have so much anxiety and so much substance use and depression. And what they are understanding is that it is a lot of these mental health issues are stemming from a pressure on these kids to achieve and excel. And they think that the reason that kids are having these reactions, and also I should say this does affect their self-esteem, is that kids will eventually, even if parents or educators never say anything like this, they internalize that, wow, my value as a human being must come from what I do and what I achieve and what I accomplish. And
Yes.
they really start to tie their self-value and their self-esteem to what they do. And this is really, really dangerous because, even if they are doing very, very well, just that the fact that their self-value is tied to what they're doing is, ultimately just, it's not good for their self-esteem over the course of their lives. And what we want to be doing instead, it's hard. I mean, I think it is okay to say, grades matter for these reasons, and here's why I want you to get good grades. But to always be emphasizing too that, as a parent, you can say, I love you no matter what. It doesn't matter what you do. If you don't do well in a class, we will work on it, but I'm not going to love you any less.
Right.
And I think, as teachers, to really show that we support students and value them no matter how well they're doing in class or what they're achieving. And we just make that explicit, because I think sometimes we assume that kids know that, we think, oh, well, I don't have to say that out loud. Of course, my kids know that I love them unconditionally, but we know from surveys that this is not how kids interpret things. They actually do sometimes say in surveys, I actually think my parents think it's more important for me to get good grades than to be like a good human or to do anything else. And that their love really is contingent upon how I do in school. So we just really need to be overt and explicit about the fact that this is just one piece and it does not define kids. And, we value them no matter what they do.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm just thinking about, a lot of what we do as parents in schools. I think it's well intentioned, and I'm thinking of the bumper stickers that I'm behind the car, and they're a proud parent of an honor roll student at Anywhere Elementary, or the papers, the local papers, and this is kind of a rural America thing, but they publish honors and high honors and everything like that. It also it leads me to believe, I've read about the indicators of success for valedictorians, in which valedictorian doesn't indicate any future success beyond high school. In fact, it puts just a lot of pressure on students, like what you're saying. I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but I've had a lot of conversations with educators. In fact, I did a podcast episode with someone on the implications of valedictorian and salutatorian. So do you think that schools could kind of shift away from overemphasizing achievements if we would, maybe look at not having a valedictorian, salutatorian, and, I don't know, maybe go to, yeah. Am I putting you on the spot with that one?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, and I haven't thought a lot about it. I do think, though, the research on these high achieving schools does point to both parents and educators being sometimes part of the problem.
Yeah.
So I do wonder if there are ways that we can rethink the kinds of things, that schools recognize, and maybe, if they do feel like they have to recognize kids who get good grades, finding other ways to also really recognize students that have nothing to do with grades, really trying to make it seem like grades are not the most important thing and achievement is not the most important thing. I think it would be helpful to have that balance. Yeah, it's a really good question. And I will say my own experience, my son is now in 6th grade, and this is the first year that they do have like principals lists and other kinds of lists. And he is starting to get like a little stressed about it. And I can see him, really thinking like, oh, does, grades really matter now? And do I need to be focusing, solely on grades? And so it's a really delicate balance, because of course I want him to do well in school,
Sure.
but I also don't want him to think that this is the most important thing and that I will, love him any less if he doesn't get on the principal's list. So I think, again, it comes back to what we were saying before about just also having conversations with kids, both as educators and parents. And if they don't do well on a test, to really just say, I know you're frustrated by this, but it's okay. We can learn from this. Mistakes are things that help us learn. And this is part of the process. And, I don't love you any less because you got a C or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I never felt loved less by my parents, thank goodness, because I was a horrible student in school. But I wasn't honored when there was honor roll assemblies, or there was always a trip at the end of the year where you got to go to a baseball game or some. I never got to go on those. And for the longest time, it did define how I believed in myself. I went to a community college after high school, convinced that I couldn't do anything more than community college. And when I took my first math class and I struggled with it, then I just told well, I'm bad at math because I was told that in high school. And, it sticks with you. And it took like 12 years for me to go back and be like, well, I can do this. Like I'm not what I was defined as in junior high and high school. And so I absolutely love this chapter. It's something that's near and dear to my heart too. Now I want to shift to chapter 8 for a moment. And this is shaping behavior and values. My moment of truth is that this chapter made me take a hard look at myself. And I'm talking specifically in the areas of modeling healthy emotional behavior and responding with empathy and then guidance. Can you talk to us a little about how parenting style plays into molding behavior and values in children?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So when I think of discipline and what makes for good discipline and a good parenting style, I mean, it ultimately comes down to communicating effectively with kids in ways that they can understand and internalize, so that they can learn from experiences and make maybe better choices in the future. And I think in the past, especially, I think it's been changing, but there was an emphasis on sort of what's called authoritarian parenting, which is a parenting style that is kind of reactive, and the parent is always in charge, and there's not a lot of respect for the child, and the parents might use harsh punishments. It's like the parents who say, when the kid says, "Why do I have to clean my room?" they say, "Because I said so." Don't question me. And the problem with parenting that way is, first, if we use a lot of harsh punishments, sometimes we're going to cause kids to feel shame and anger and resentment, which really gets in the way of being able to connect with the parent and, communicate with them and understand what the lesson is from this, or what can they learn from this situation. And so that the punishment leads to the kids feeling a way that really kind of inhibits the whole point of discipline, which is to help, teach kids.
Right.
And, and that lack of respect too is harmful for kids in other ways. They really feel like they can't communicate with their parents. It really gets in the way of like having these open conversations that we know are so useful. So it turns out that, the parenting style that's really associated with the best outcomes in kids is one where, there are still boundaries and limits and expectations that parents have. It's not like the kids are in charge, but parents are less likely to react angrily. They are, they're using discipline as, again, an opportunity to really try to connect with kids and communicate with them in ways that don't make them feel ashamed. They're more warm with their kids and respectful. And this really just helps kids feel safe. It helps kids feel loved, and it ensures that those moments where parents are really trying to to teach their kids something, maybe when they've misbehaved, that their kids can really be receptive to it and understand. And so that's why when our kids, are challenging in their behavior, when we respond first with empathy, that helps them stay calm. So they're not reacting with that anger or that shame. And then, it helps them regulate their emotions, makes them feel heard, and then, helps them connect so that they can then learn when we say, okay, so, I know you didn't mean to knock over the lamp, but it did break. And so what could you do? Maybe next time you shouldn't be roller skating around the house. What do you think?
Yeah.
And really try to have more of a conversation. I say this because my 8-year-old just got roller skates.
There you go.
Roller skating around the house.
So it's interesting when you talk about the parenting styles, because I'm hoping that you're going to tell me that when I accidentally slip back into those bad behaviors, that I still have a chance to correct. Because what you're saying, like, I loved this chapter that talks about a better way of responding when our children do something that's unfavorable. But then there's a part of me that I still have that. I guess it's the amygdala in my brain that, has those trigger responses of, whenever my kids do something. So, what can you tell us to reassure it's okay if we slip back into these parenting styles that you talk about that are less favorable?
So, yes, I think there's a myth out there that it's possible to be a perfect parent and to respond empathetically and constructively to everything our children do. And this is very much a myth. Nobody can do this.
Right.
I certainly can't. I really think that actually making mistakes, quote unquote mistakes, as a parent is actually really good for our kids. If we can use those moments again to sort of open up to our kids and have conversations. So as an example, if my kid does something and I'm just exhausted and I've had a tough day and I yell at my kid for something that I really shouldn't yell at them for,
right,
maybe an honest mistake, I, very quickly recognize that, oh, I just yelled at my kid and I probably shouldn't have done that. I try to take some deep breaths. And then I say to my child, I apologize and I take responsibility and I say, you know what? I'm really sorry I yelled at you just then. It's not an excuse, but I'm tired and I think I just, my emotions got the best of me. I'm really sorry. And sometimes too, I will then ask my kid to sort of help me figure out how to not do that next time. Like I'll say, so, do you have any ideas for what I could do next time I'm feeling that angry or that upset in the moment? And, my kids love that. I mean, they love saying, oh, Mom, you should take 3 deep breaths, or you should stamp your feet. That helps me. And so really, getting them again involved in discussions around like emotional regulation can be very helpful. I think too, just the act of making mistakes in front of our kids helps to teach kids that everybody makes mistakes, including grown-ups. Yep. I think sometimes, especially perfectionistic kids, they're so scared of mistakes. They think mistakes are the worst thing and it's going to be the end of the world if they screw something up. And so when we make mistakes as parents and we own up to them and we say, oh, that I shouldn't have done that. That was a mistake. I think it can be really empowering for some kids. And they think, oh, so Mom and Dad mess up sometimes too. That's okay. That makes it okay that I mess up sometimes. So I really feel like these moments of quote unquote screwing up as a parent can ultimately be incredibly constructive. So do not feel bad.
Thank goodness.
Everybody does it. And and they can be turned into something good.
And as I'm listening to you, I can't help but think how this can apply to educators so much as well, that as teachers, as principals, superintendent, whatever it may be, we're going to screw up. And I think a lot of times we put it on ourselves that we have to be perfect. And I'm the first to say I'm not perfect. So I think that being able to apologize to our students when we, say something wrong or respond wrong, or our staff, if we're, in that position, can be really powerful. Now, if I'm hearing, as you talk about this correctly and how we respond, that sometimes when we say like, oh, my kid's such an asshole, really we need to kind of look at ourselves first and to make sure it's not us that's being the asshole. Am I interpreting that one right?
Yes, that's another big theme from the book is
Yeah.
that there is a lot of research showing that the kids learn from what we do. I mean, again, it's the social learning theory I was mentioning. We want to model the behavior that we want to see in our kids.
Yeah.
And that is one reason why taking responsibility and apologizing is very powerful in front of kids, because kids struggle with this. I mean, we all struggle with apologizing and taking responsibility for our actions. But when we can model doing that in front of our kids, it makes it so much easier for them to learn how to do it and to, understand what is a true apology and how do I take responsibility. So yes, absolutely, to the degree that we can,
Yeah. Right.
model the kind of behavior that you want to see in front of your kids.
Certainly. Now, Melinda, before we go, in many chapters, you discuss topics that are of high contention in the education arena, and so not just parenting, but in the education arena, you're seeing a lot in media today. Topics such as bullying, screen time, sex education. What you have found through your research is that parents are highly instrumental in cultivating this teaching first at home. Moreover, as parents, we really shouldn't count on our schools to properly deliver education on some topics that society deems contentious. What advice can you give parents navigating those hard conversations with their children that we had, talked about earlier?
I think it's really important to keep in mind you do not have to have all the answers. You do not have to know how to perfectly talk about an issue. A lot of these are issues that make us uncomfortable. I know, as a white parent, I was raised in a family myself where nobody talked about race. And so I find it very difficult sometimes to talk about race in front of my kids. I know it's important. I know the research suggests it's very important, but I think, the discomfort doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, first of all. And you really don't have to have all the answers. And I think what helps too is to think about, instead of having some lecture, now I'm going to sit here and talk to my kids about race and racism, and it's going to be 2 hours long, instead try to just bring it up in little snippets. I use the things that I come across in my daily life as sort of conversation starters. Sometimes the shows that I'm watching with my kids, they'll say something and I'll pause it and say, let's talk about what just happened there. An example being when I'm just driving with my kids sometimes and I see a sign, in a neighbor's lawn, like a Black Lives Matter sign, I will say, hey, who knows what Black Lives Matter is, or who knows, what that refers to.
Sure.
And just using the things you kind of stumble across in life as conversation starters can be really helpful. And that way you don't have to have some long, drawn out conversation with your child. It could be just a few minutes, but it could be every, week. That would be ideal. I think also if you really don't kind of know what to say, you can also use the strategy of kind of asking your kids questions. Or if they ask you a question and you don't know how to answer it, you can say, well, what do you think?
Sure.
And really sort of I think it's very helpful to have more of a dialogue than a lecture with kids. And you can absolutely say as well, that's a really good question. And I don't know if I have an answer right now. I'd like to do a little research and get back to you, because that also is teaching kids that, it's okay not to have all the answers, that doing research and really trying to understand an issue is important. I mean, that is teaching kids important skills. So I think, you just don't have to feel like an expert. You don't have to worry that if you get something wrong and you realize later, like, I probably should have explained this a little bit differently, you go back to your child and
revisit
say,
it.
What we talked. Yeah, revisiting is like the best thing that you can do in a way. So, I've definitely done this where I've explained something and then kind of done some research and realized, I didn't frame that exactly the way I probably should have. And I go back and I say, you asked that great question and I gave you that answer, but I thought a little bit more about it. And, here's maybe something I want to add. So I think, yes, it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to worry that you don't have all the answers, but that is okay. Just like lean into that discomfort, have short conversations, tackle a little bit at a time. And that's going to be incredibly constructive for your kids.
I think it's so important. What I hear schools say a lot is, as far as schools need to tell their story, because if you don't, someone else is going to tell it. And I think it's the same principle applies, that you need to have these conversations with because if not, someone else is, and you cannot control the message all the time of what they're getting from someone else. And so, it gives you an opportunity, in my opinion, to give the information that you know is accurate and that your children need. And so, it's like the first step of really raising them to be informed citizens, because as we know, people can say whatever they want out there and call it true. And so this is the opportunity to, I guess, give them the information needed to empower them with the knowledge.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. The book is How to Raise Kids Who Aren't Assholes, Science-Based Strategies for Better Parenting from Tots to Teens. Melinda, thank you so much for joining us on Anchored in Education today.
Thank you so much, Scott. This was a wonderful conversation.
Now, you can read more about Melinda on today's episode page. Simply head over to my website, escottengland.com, and click on the podcast tab at the top. You'll also find all of Melinda's links to her social media there as well. And don't forget to subscribe to Anchored in Education on whatever platform you get your podcasts. If the whole reason you're apprehensive about the book is because of the title, then allow me to recommend to you to buy a piece of masking tape to cover whatever word is giving you apprehension. To me, I think the word that we struggle with the most is better, as in strategies for better parenting. I think sometimes we struggle to swallow our pride to admit that maybe, in fact, we could become better parents. I know I've thought that at times, which is exactly why people like me need to be reading Melinda's book. Parenting is hard work. What fascinates me is that we often approach parenting in similar ways that we've experienced parenting growing up. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? We often see the same thing in teaching as we fall into habits and practices that we witnessed our teachers doing when we were in school. I find Melinda's book to be a must-need for parents because she doesn't settle for this is how we've always done it. She lets science and research fill the gaps in her knowledge of parenting. Doing so can help us become better parents while producing better versions of ourselves in the form of our children. Reading it as an educator is a good reminder of the difficulties of parenting. Parents are often sending us the best version they have of their children. Would we like to see improvements? Well, of course, but not every parent is armed with the knowledge. We can do our part in helping parents while also helping students. To me, this is just one more bit of proof that at the end of the day, we are all anchored in education.